testing, whenever you have the idea of, I want to find the best candidate for this job, you're going to go out and gather an entire pool of people that are interested in the job. And so you're going to gather in this whole aspect of it. And then you're going to go through some type of hiring process. What is the hiring process? Probably an interview is going to be in it. You may want to have some type of testing. Always, the best kind of testing is called content validity. You take a part of the job and you have the candidates all try out for that part of the job. For instance, you're going to be a college executive. You sit down and you may want to write a memo to all the faculty and staff of your college and say the following 5 things in the memo. Now, does that type of a test, is that germane? Is it appropriate for a college president to write a memo to everybody on campus? Well, yeah, that is content validity. You're actually taking part of the job, the content of the job, and applying it to the actual workplace. Let's go see about some other testing that are similar, that some people would actually sit down and say, well, this is part of the job. An eligibility test. Is stamina part of the job? Are there some specific skills you want to measure for? If you're going to hire somebody that does accounting, can you put a spreadsheet in there and have an entire Excel spreadsheet in there and have 5 spaces vacant and have them calculate what should be in the 5 spaces? IQ, is intelligence necessary? How about emotional quotient and EQ? I'm not certain you can show that IQ is always germane to a job. Somebody should be smart and intelligent. Maybe is a bachelor's degree appropriate? Pay attention to what is out there and what is germane, or what would be part of the overall qualifications of the job. Sometimes an individual, they're free from problems that could prevent him and her from performing the function. It could be substance abuse, polygraph, HIV, who knows what it is. But sometimes you'll have people with privacy rights saying you have to do a balancing test to make certain that you have eligible people and ineligible, and then sit down and make some accommodation if appropriate. But generally, if you're going to have a consistent testing process, every candidate should go through the same thing, just like every candidate should be asked the same batch of questions. You may expand upon that during the interview if the candidate says something that you're more interested in, but for the most part, everybody gets the same questions, everybody gets the same tests. So you want to look at the employer's interest in securing a problem-free and substance-free workplace. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but you want to balance the interest. The employee has certain privacy rights and protections against self-incrimination, although if they're going to be your employee, you certainly have to have access to what they know, how they perform under pressure, and any kind of areas. If, let's say, for instance, if they have a criminal background and they've been involved in financial fraud, you have every legal right to sit down and explore that aspect with a credit check or a criminal background check. All those are germane to the job, and you have a legal right to pursue that as well. Eligibility testing, sometimes you want to make certain that they're capable and qualified for it, but it should be validated. They need to show that the test is job-related and consistent with the business necessity for that. Otherwise, you may have a disparate impact defense on it, and you may be sued over that whole aspect of it. One thing I want to make really clear. Griggs versus Duke Power, I would write that on my notes. That is probably one of the largest areas of the case referred to for testing discrimination. If you do a personality test, only these people over here can do this work. Okay, then number one, you really don't know what you're talking about. Who's ever recommending that, I would not use them at all in the process because of the fact that you are practicing discrimination. Oh, it may not be racial based upon skin color. It may not be religious. You're saying that only this mindset can be successful in this job. Unless you have quantitative data to show that that type of testing is appropriate for the job, you better sit down and go back and rethink that whole aspect. Otherwise, you're saying that this is the only skill set, when in fact there are other people that may do the job as well, but they have a different type of mindset. So be cautious on what the testing consultants say. Will they be willing to stand up next to you in court when somebody's suing you over the fact that you said this was that, but I can do this and I have evidence of this? So be careful about consultants that come in that think they know what they're talking about. Make certain they've been vetted before in the court of law, that they're validated and germane to testing, and they have real experience doing it. The validation really is the core as to, are you doing that? There's 3 types of different validation generally, and you're looking at the aspect of what is it. I always fall back onto content-related aspect of it. Have a simulated exercise. I like to have what's called a market basket, where you have what would happen on the in basket for a normal duty for somebody to come into the job, and boom, they have to do these 3 duties over here. Have them perform the 3 duties and then compare them between candidates. Have a good, solid, validated test. Those are always the easiest way to do it, and they'll stand up in front of court. They'll also stand up, more importantly, in front of a jury or a judge. Psychological tests, some of them really are out of this world. I applied for a job one time, and it was a test by a company called Wonderlic, and it wanted to know about drugs and substance abuse, and it had a couple questions in there that if I was treated better at home, I wouldn't yell and hit my wife as often. I kid you not. And it had all this stuff about drugs and everything else, and I had to go back to the directions because my blood was boiling, and the directions said, if it doesn't apply to you, put false. I vowed in my own mind and heart, not out loud, I says, if I get this job, I'm going to kill this test and never use it again. I got the job, and we killed the test 2 months later. That was the end of that whole line of tests. I just felt it was inappropriate. It made me uncomfortable. And by the way, if it makes me uncomfortable and this is an area that I'm in charge of, I killed it because I wanted to make certain that nobody experienced that type of ridiculous stress in the process. Sometimes if you're in charge of employment law, make certain that it's germane to the job. Make certain it's not deliberately offensive. Now, sometimes you may want that to put somebody underneath stress, but that was not the intent of the test at this point. Personality tests, I think, are always a bad idea for the hiring process. They're excellent for team building. They're excellent for staff development. You have all that aspect of it, but for hiring, I think it's always off the boards. I would never use it, nor would I ever recommend it. Physical ability tests. Sometimes you have to do that. You're going to hire a driver who's going to be driving around dropping off boxes of paper. Well, a box of paper weighs 20 pounds. You got to bend over, then you got to stand up, you got to pick it up. Is it appropriate for you to have literally 5 boxes of paper and have them go back and carry 5 boxes of paper across the room? Absolutely. That's a physical ability test, because there will probably be situations where they'll carry 5 boxes of paper all on the same trip. That's appropriate. Medical tests, general specific, make certain it's specific to the job. Do you need to have somebody who doesn't use drugs? One time I had a situation where we had a freezer go out in the building, and I needed to have all hands on deck to unload the freezer because we had $30,000 of food we received the day before. I had all the maintenance people all lined up. They formed a line, except I couldn't find one employee, and I checked the time slot. His card was there. I eventually found him. He was recovering from a hangover, hiding in a corner of the boiler room, sound asleep. From that point forward, I sent him out, and the next day I met with him and his steward, and the solution was, you enroll immediately in a 30-day rehab program. If you don't, you're suspended unpaid for 30 days, and if it happens again, I'm going to fire you. So he enrolled, and to this day he's sober. He hates me, except but his life is better for it. So that said, sometimes you need to have the medical test. Make certain that on the drug test that is germane to the job. Having somebody that's working with 2,400 volts of electricity sure seems like they better be drug-free and alcohol-free, and you have a right to go back and test that on a regular basis if you need to do that. A lot of times, you need to do it for a safety aspect of it. The drug and alcohol test isn't all that expensive. If you have a group of bus drivers, do you want to have a bus driver that is using drugs? No, you don't. You have the lives of up to 90 children inside of a metal box driving down the street. If that person even blinks inappropriately or whatever, they could be involved in a major accident that could lead to loss of life, certainly massive trauma if they're involved in an accident. You have a legal right to ensure that person is clear and free from drug and alcohol tests. you can actually have testing that is pertain to that because it is eligible to it. So pay attention to what you can and can't do. Make certain if you have a testing policy, whatever you have legal counsel that you can document the testing is appropriate, and you keep that letter as soon as they recommend, yes, I can do that, in a file, because 7 years from the date you have that letter, you may all of a sudden sit down and say, oh no, I am being sued, and pull that letter out and make sure you get the attorney support you on it. Have a written drug policy. That should be part of every corporation. You should have a supervisor training program about testing. Have education awareness with the employees, what is expected. If you have an EAP, an employee assistance program, make certain all the employees know about that. That's where they can go and get help, either from a psychological perspective or from some type of substance perspective. A drug testing program wherever it's appropriate and germane to the job. Content validation is always easy to defend. Motivational testing is an easy target for attorneys. I never recommend them. And drug testing applies certainly to some physical risk drugs where the employee's life or somebody else's life could be at risk. Hiring and testing, they can commingle, but make certain you do it with a plan and with a lot of wisdom behind your overall perspective as to how it pertains to the job. Take care.